Can you imagine if you looked up and saw like hundreds of deers hanging from trees? Like, oh my God,
That's a scene from a horror movie.
it is
Yeah.
a scene from a horror movie. That's crazy. And yeah, I mean, absolutely get the hell out of there. Welcome, everybody, to Unraveling the Unexplained. My name is Kat, and I'm a longtime astral traveler and spirit consultant. This is my brother John, a longtime fan of the creepy and the paranormal.
Evening, folks.
He has picked out a video for me to react to. I don't know what it is, but we are about to find out together.
In July of 2009, Bo and Kate embarked on their dream hiking vacation to Mount Shasta. Within 24 hours, they were fleeing for their lives. What turned this picturesque getaway into a nightmare? The answer lies in a web of mysteries that have haunted this peak for centuries. Shasta holds secrets that seem to defy explanation. But Bo and Kate's terrifying experience? Well, that's just the beginning. Welcome to the In-Between. I'm Carol Ann, your guide to exploring the myriad of mysteries of Mount Shasta. In late July of 2009, Bo gets a few days off of work, so he and his girlfriend, who we're going to call Kate, decide to go on a mid-week camping trip to the McBride Springs Campground, which is just on the southwest corner of Mount Shasta in the Shasta Trinity National Forest, surrounded by pine trees, beautiful creeks, and lots of hiking trails.
Be nice to go there sometime.
Bo and Kate plan this awesome 4-day adventure and arrive.
Yeah, I was just thinking, take note, destination locations.
Yeah, like we're not exactly big campers, but that does look like
we could try camping.
It looked like it'd be worth it to kind of get used to outdoorsy stuff. You're better at it than I am.
I think that we would have difficulty. We're more danger to each other. You know what I mean? Like, I think we would try to kill each other trying to start a fire or figure out how to pitch a tent.
Yeah, we'd off ourselves long before anything paranormal could mess with us.
Yeah, the paranormal would take one look at us and be like, nah.
That they're already taken care of.
Yeah, they're already on edge. Let's not. Sleeping on dirt will do that to you, though. It's not comfortable.
Like maybe we'd have to like work our way up to Mount Shasta. Maybe do something a little bit more.
I'm sure they have like a lodge or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's a vacation location in a beautiful mountain area. Like I'm sure they have.
Yeah.
Maybe they have a nice haunted lodge or something we could stay at instead of instead of hanging out in the forest.
Something to look into. Yeah.
Yeah.
At the virtually empty campground, this just keeps getting better. On a picture-perfect, warm Monday afternoon, ready to set up their tent and start exploring the surrounding wilderness. They set up their campsite as quick as they can, and within just an hour or two, they're all ready to go. They grab a quick lunch of hot dogs and beef jerky and decide to go on a short hike to stretch their legs and just get a good feel for the area. Neither Bo nor Kate have been to McBride Springs Campground before, or this area at all, so they are very excited to go exploring. The two of them walk to one of the nearest trailheads when Kate, who's quite the outdoorsman, gets the idea that they should go off trail a little bit and maybe just explore for a few miles and see what they find. Infamously bad idea, right? But Kate says, this is a piece of cake. They have a compass and full cell service, and Kate has a photographic memory as well, so finding their way back should be no problem at all. Bo, being completely confident in Kate's outdoor abilities, says, okay, lead the way. And so off into the wilderness they go. After about an hour or so of really taking their time and just enjoying the beauty of the Mount Shasta wilderness, they see a clearing next to a small creek with a large rock that looks like the perfect place to sit and take a break. As they just sit there trying to soak in the beauty around them, Bo can't help but feel a little niggling of unease. He doesn't know why. This place couldn't be more peaceful. He glances over at Kate, who looks completely peaceful, just watching the flowing water of the creek. Obviously nothing's bothering her, but he asks her anyway, do you notice anything strange or out of place? She looks at him kind of confused and says, what do you mean? And Bo just shrugs and says, I don't know, I just have this weird feeling. And they sit there in silence for a minute, but Bo still has this feeling, almost like a heaviness or a stillness in the air. And as he's standing there trying to put his finger on the problem, this odor, like vomit-inducingly bad, hits his face. And the next second, it hits Kate too. And they start looking around for the source of this ungodly stench, thinking there must be an animal carcass close by, but they don't see anything. Then Bo looks up. About 30 or 40 feet above them in a nearby pine tree is a dead deer, or what's left of it. The head and front legs have been ripped off of it, with the rest of it just hanging on the branch like somebody had put it there for later. Judging by the look and smell of the carcass, it's not very old, 2, maybe 3 days at most. And even though the body is relatively fresh, it's a hot day, and that smell should have attracted all kinds of flies and insects to start feasting. But they don't see any of that happening. And speaking of that smell, how is it that they were in the spot for like 15 minutes before they smelled it? It's windy, but with that level of stink, they should have been able to smell it right away. Bo and Kate decide,
I think that depends on whether or not there was a downdraft to carry this
Yeah.
scent downwards.
30, 40 feet up, I guess that would be a pretty decent distance. I would be less confused about the smell and more confused about how a dead deer carcass got 40 feet up in a tree.
That's not the behavior of anything we know about, although it's kind of smart. Like, if all the other animals are on the ground and you're trying to save your meal for later, hiding it in a tree is...
I guess if you got the means to climb up a 40-foot pine tree and stick a deer carcass up there, then all the more power to you.
Yeah, it's kind of a smart tactic to save your lunch for later from other things that might come around and try to eat it if you left it.
Yeah.
So, but as far as I know, that's not, like, bears can climb trees, but they can't carry deers up there and place them in branches, as far as
I've certainly never heard of it.
Yeah, no, I've never heard of that behavior from a
Bears
bear.
might be more talented than I give them credit for.
Maybe. New bear skill discovered.
maybe it's a good time to head back.
You think?
But since the way that they got there was pretty rugged and it took them quite a while, they figured that their best bet is to hop back on the trail to get back to the campground. Kate's awesome sense of direction kicks in, and she says the trail's right up there, just beyond that thicket of trees and the small creek. The two of them get up, and with Bo in the lead, make their way over to the creek and around the thicket, where Bo stops dead in his tracks. There, in a small pile, are at least a half a dozen deer heads. And judging by the way the flesh looks around the neck, these heads were ripped off. Not to mention, they're all missing their eyes, and they appear to be no older than 24 hours at most. Now, Bo and Kate are getting a really bad feeling, like something seriously wrong, seriously bad is happening. Who or what is out here doing this? They fight the feeling of panic rising up and take a minute to just collect themselves before continuing on. Takes about another 20 minutes, but Kate's instincts prove correct as they finally find the trail again. However, as they keep moving along, they notice that the forest around them is actually completely quiet. And Bo can't.
I was going to say that earlier, but like often if you get that like weird uncanny feeling in the middle of the woods, like he did when he first sat down at the creek, it's a lot of times when there's no noise. Like if the forest is completely silent, it feels weird and oppressive like that. So it's something to keep an eye out for, as if you're somewhere and you get that strange, that feeling, pay attention to your ears. Like, do you hear any insects, any birds, any movement? Like
your mind has subconsciously picked up on the audio cue that it's all gone quiet.
Yeah, exactly. That feeling is often generated by that. And it's not the first time that I've heard that as a phenomenon.
Shake the feeling that they're being followed. As they're just about to get back to their campsite, they run into a park ranger and just start pouring out their story of all these creepy things that happened. The ranger, with a look on his face like this is not the first time he's heard a story like this, tells them, everything's fine. Don't worry about it. I'll look into it. And with that mild brush off, Bo and Kate make their way back to their campsite without any more drama. But the rest of the evening, they can't stop thinking about it and talking about it. How did that deer get so far up in the tree? And why would somebody leave a pile of deer heads? Why did the ranger not seem surprised when they told him about what they found? And why did his answer sound so rehearsed? Finally, the adrenaline rush of the day's events wears off, and the two climb into their tent and go to bed. Unfortunately, Bo wakes up in the middle of the night and has to pee really bad. So he gets up, maneuvers his way to the tent opening, and starts to unzip the tent. He stops mid-pull when he hears something. He thinks he knows what he heard, but he sits there quietly for a minute when he hears it again and again. It's very faint at first, but it gets louder and louder until he can't deny what he's hearing. He starts shaking, lets go of the zipper, and dives back into his sleeping bag, grabbing his knife for protection, with any thought of going outside to pee completely erased from his head. Eventually, the adrenaline must have crashed and put him to sleep because the next thing he knows, Kate's waking him up in the morning. Bo goes from 0 to 100 in a complete panic and tells her, "We have to leave now. We are not safe here." Kate tries to calm him down. "What are you talking about?" And Bo tells her that late last night, as he was getting ready to leave the tent to go pee, he heard Kate's voice whispering to him, calling his name and telling him, "Come to me. I have something to show you." From the woods, and that she had called him by name. Obviously, Kate has no way to explain it, but she's also definitely creeped out. They both decide maybe they just need to pack up and find a different campground. So that's exactly what they do.
Or like never go camping again.
Yeah. At the very least, maybe not at Mount Shasta.
Yeah, no. I think our camping days are done. That's enough camping. That's, yeah.
Double speed. As they're driving out of the campground, they see the ranger from the previous day in the campground lodge. So Bo pulls the car over, gets out of the car, and goes in to talk to him. He tells the ranger, on top of all the crazy things that happened yesterday with somebody killing all of those deer, last night I heard someone who knew my name that sounded like my girlfriend whispering to me and trying to get me to follow her into the woods. You might have a serial killer or something. You really need to do something about this. The ranger's feathers get more than a little ruffled. He gets really mad and starts yelling at Bo, telling him, "How dare you go off on an unmarked trail? That it's extremely dangerous and that there are mountain lions and bears and they could have gotten lost." And the ranger just keeps getting angrier and more incensed to the point that he ends his tirade by asking them to leave the campground. Okay, no problem, considering that's exactly what they were doing anyway, but wow, that reaction's a little over the top. Bo and Kate leave and never go back to McBride Springs campground.
So I don't think the behavior is weird. Of the whatever it is, anyway. Like, if you think about it, there's not much tasty to eat in a head, so they take the head off, eat the eyeballs out of it, and take the rest of the carcass away. I mean, that seems
Although
like...
that is a lot of deer, so either it would be multiple somethings or one very hungry something.
Yeah, or maybe they're making deer jerky, and that's why it's hung out in a tree. I don't know. But again, like, it's not that the behavior, like, it's not that it doesn't make sense, it's that we don't know what would do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that doesn't seem like a bear deal, and
right.
Certainly not a cougar deal or any kind of mountain lion.
No, it's
thing.
a logical thought process behavior. So it feels like something with more of a human level intellect. Like, I don't need the head, I'm going to take it off, but I'll keep the eyes because those are squishy and tasty. And then I'll take the rest of the carcasses off for whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that it seems
maybe
that's a more thought process.
maybe there's other trees with deer bodies hanging up in them.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. Or they left that one there because they sensed it was, I don't know, there's something wrong with it.
Yeah, well, it's like that's almost my guess is that you got the pile of the deer heads, so it kills a bunch of deer, takes the heads off, starts putting them up in trees. The two campers just happen to see the one in the tree, but maybe there's a dozen other trees in the same area. There's thousands and thousands of trees in the forest.
Can you imagine if you looked up and saw like hundreds of deers hanging from trees? Like, oh my God.
That's a scene from a horror movie.
It is a scene from a horror movie. That's crazy. And yeah, I mean, absolutely get the hell out of there. I don't know why the ranger would be so upset unless he literally just has difficulty with people who say stuff like that, and it gets frustrating. Like, we tell everybody who comes in here, don't go off the trails. And you do get sometimes a sense from national park rangers that they get tired of having to tell people the same stuff over and over again. Like, it was so bad at Yellowstone that they handed us an entire pamphlet of just don't do this. Like, So I don't know if the rangers just get like super tired of having to explain the rules to people,
Yeah.
and so
Like they know that there's maybe issues if you go off the trails. People run into shit like that.
well, I'm sure, when you go off trail, you are no longer on a designated route where people often are. Like the wildlife, that's the place for the wildlife.
Yeah.
Long story short is either way, don't go off trail at national parks, right? Like
Yeah.
whether it's some sort of bizarre beast in the forest or just to the ranger's point, you don't want to come across a bear or a mountain lion either. Like
Yeah.
just go enjoy the beauty and stay on the trails. Don't go wandering off into the woods.
Not unless you're willing to deal with any trouble you come across.
Right. And so I
You
imagine the
have to
park
understand
ranger
you're
is
kind of taking
just,
your life into your own hands when you do that.
yeah, I imagine the park ranger is just sick of people not following the directions.
Yeah.
Wow. I wonder if it's the work of one seriously paranormally talented, demented dude, or if Bo and Kate were just lucky enough to have witnessed 2 different episodes of Shasta weirdness in one day. Either way, if you choose to go see Shasta, I would seriously consider not staying in that southwest corner where McBride Springs Campground is located, because this next encounter happens only 1 mile away. The September 9th, 1976 edition of the Mount Shasta Herald runs a story about a Virgil Larson. Virgil, a 47-year-old logger working on a helicopter logging operation south of Cascade Gulch on the lower southwest slopes of Mount Shasta, gets to work about 8:30 on the morning of Friday, September 3rd. As he's making his way down the slope, Virgil is separated from Pat, but they're still within hearing distance of each other. Virgil hears somebody else on the slope coming toward him. So he looks up and he sees someone coming through the brush about 50 feet away, opposite the side that Pat is on. Thinking it's a forest ranger, Virgil shouts at him. But instead of yelling back, the person stops, turns its head toward Virgil, and starts walking again about another 25 feet where it stops behind a bush. When Virgil calls to him a second time, he stands up from behind the bush. That's when Virgil figures out that this is not somebody from the Forest Service. In fact, not even anything human. What Virgil is now looking at, he can only see from the waist up, but he can see that it is covered in black matted fur that's longest on its head. Doesn't remember anything about its facial features or if it's wearing clothes, but he does remember the smell, which he describes as a half-rotten bear hide. Virgil, freaked out of his mind, takes off running down the slope to find his partner, Pat. They immediately call the sheriff's office and the forest rangers. Carrying chunks of lumber as clubs, he and Pat return to the area about a half an hour later. The creature is gone, but the stink is not. Pat stands behind the bush with his hard hat on a stick to approximate the height of the creature. Their guess? 7 to 7.5 feet tall. Sergeant Bullington, the one who responded from the sheriff's office, says he is quite sure Larson saw something or someone, but would not even hazard a guess as to what it might be. Many local tribes tell stories about encountering the Shasta people, a group of people described as shorter and darker than the Native Americans, who supposedly lived there first. Legend has it these Shasta folk came from a far-off land across the Western Ocean, and apparently chose this spot because the snowy mountain peak reminded them of home. But when the Native American tribes came to town, the story goes that these mysterious Shasta people were shown the door. They supposedly set off to go back to their original homeland, which they believed had pooled in Atlantis and sunk beneath the waves. Joshua and his dad go on a little hiking trip to Mount Shasta. They drive up the side of the mountain to the parking lot where the old ski bowl trail starts. The landscape is a very barren incline, filled with rocks and boulders and dirt and very few trees. About an hour into the trail, they come across a strange grouping of these large boulders arranged in kind of a circle. Kind of weird, but okay. And they just keep hiking. They only encounter 3 people during the entire hike. The first 2 are a father and son. They meet them on this really steep switchback area that runs along the side of the cliff until you get to the top. And they stop and say hi, make some small talk about the trail, and then go off on their separate ways, with Joshua and his dad heading up and their new trail buddies heading down. Joshua and his dad keep walking up the incline for just a couple of minutes when Joshua turns around and sees the father and son way down the trail. And he thinks, well, how is that possible? It's like a 20-minute hike to get down to where they are. And they made it in 2? There's nobody else around. And even though they're now really small, he can still see the color of their clothes. So it's got to be them. He points it out to his dad, who says, yeah, that's weird. But they just keep going.
So I will point out and say that going uphill takes a lot longer than going downhill.
Yeah, there's a bit more of a physical exertion involved.
You are going up much slower than people are going down. Just facts, right? But
That
I don't
and-
know, maybe it still seemed like a lot. But especially on a switchback, they could have looked like they were a lot further away. than
Yeah,
they
it can be
actually were.
difficult to judge distance.
Yeah.
Once they finally reach the top of the cliff, there is another weird rock formation that's off to the side of the trail. This time, there's a lot more rocks than before, and these are arranged more like in straight rows, like headstones in a graveyard. Weird, but again, they just keep moving. They reach another steep section with switchbacks, just like before, to get to the top of another cliff. And they keep going until they reach a point where it's pretty obvious they're not going to be able to get any further without climbing gear. So I guess it's time to head back down. When they turn around, Joshua sees a man standing around all these big rocks, just staring at them. He's wearing a button-up shirt, cargo shorts, and a wide-brimmed straw hat. And he's close enough that Joshua should be able to make out his facial features. But it's like he doesn't have any. It's like a blank slate of skin. Joshua says, "Dad, look at this guy," just as the man quickly ducks down behind a boulder. But not all the way. His head is sticking up over the top as he's watching them, like a little kid who thinks you can't see them behind the rock. The next thing Joshua is aware of is that he's standing at the edge of the cliff, with his dad yelling his name and dragging him backwards, pulling him back to the trail. Joshua, sensing he just missed something, asks his dad, "What's going on?" His dad tells them that he just started walking towards the man in the hat. Even though his dad was calling to him, Joshua's dad tells him, "Stay here," and goes down to the boulders to look for the man. But he isn't there. The only choices at this point are either up or down the trail, in which case they would see him, or off the cliff. But he is nowhere to be seen. Joshua has no idea what happened on that trail, and he has no explanation for it. He's told lots of people about it, and no one has an explanation.
I would be curious to know if, somebody maybe fell off the cliff there.
Well, I mean, it's possible there are stories of people have fallen off cliffs there. I
Yeah,
mean,
you'd have to
any
look
trail
into it.
like that, you'd probably have a few instances like that.
You'd have to look into it. Sometimes a restless spirit, a transition spirit, is trying to share with you what happened to them. But it's possible, again, if it's hitting you off guard and you don't know what's going on, that you're just repeating the pattern,
Yeah.
actually physically doing it. I've certainly had a lot of encounters where an individual is trying to share with me what happened to them, and then that experience, it's like I'm experiencing it. I'm put into their perspective because all they have to share is their perspective of what happened.
So you think maybe Joshua, being a kid, more receptive to those kind of things, would have been communicated with by the spirit that's trying to communicate what happened, but Joshua, being, again, kid, more susceptible to that kind of influence, was actually fully pulled into the experience where he's going towards the cliff.
Right, where he's actually walking towards the cliff himself without realizing he's doing it.
Right.
So that's entirely possible. And to see a person dressed in, a shirt and a hat, like this isn't a hairy beast in the woods, but not reflecting a face. It's like they're not all the way there. So that sounds like a vibrational translation of, it's likely he saw somebody who had passed away there.
All right. Do you think the rock formations also have anything to do with it?
I mean, who knows in times past why people, I mean, we have places and sites like that all over the place where rocks were piled up in various formations.
And it was just talking about there being a people that lived here even before the Native Americans, the
Right.
Shasta people. So maybe those rock formations were set up there by them.
I mean, a lot of the times in a national park setting, if you've got something that's actually off a trail like that, it'll be, and it's old, it'll be marked, you know, like with a little plaque or a sign that says, hey, this has been here since these times or whatever, or, you know, so that people get the information. It seems like, I mean, they're on a switchback and maybe it's just not a very,
Well, it's not a well-known trail, maybe.
right, maybe. Although there was other people
On it.
going up and down, so who knows? I think maybe the implication that they were trying to make is that maybe those father and son that were going down were also apparitions of some kind because they seemed so much further down. But
That's possible.
it seems unlikely to me, given that they spoke and interacted and chatted with these people.
Yeah.
And I mean, you'd think they would notice if something was off about that interaction. They certainly noticed something was off about the interaction with Hat Man.
Yeah.
So he did a little research and found other stories about encounters with a man with no facial features wearing a hat. And he also read that the Native American tribes from the area view Mount Shasta as a holy site. They believe it could act as a portal to other dimensions and that it is guarded by spirits whose sole purpose is to protect the volcano. Did Joshua and his dad maybe anger the Mountain Spirit Protection Squad? Or maybe they were getting a little too close to a hidden entrance to Lemuria. For anyone who may not have seen our first video on Mount Shasta, the Lemurians are an ancient race of technologically advanced people who are rumored to live inside Shasta in a city called Telos. But whether that last story was spirit protectors or Lemurians, the author of this next story knows exactly what she experienced. This encounter actually comes from one of our very own in-betweeners, Loves Africa 111. So we're going to call her Sarah. Sarah starts by saying that she thought all the Lemurian stories and stories of the inner city of Telos, the Lemurian city rumored to exist inside the mountain, were total bunk and absolutely ridiculous. She's actually hiked on the mountain before, back in the 90s, and experienced nothing out of the ordinary. But that all changed in 2017. She and her boyfriend, now husband, we're going to call him Charles, who had just arrived from Zimbabwe, decided to go on a camping trip to Shasta in March. Unfortunately for them, the weather's not cooperating and it's pouring rain when they get there. They only have a two-wheel drive car, but they manage to slip and slide their way up this muddy, single-lane dirt road until they find a great spot surrounded by trees that looks like it'll make a pretty good camping spot. So they pull off the road and park. However, it's late and it's raining too hard to put up a tent, so they really don't have a choice but to sleep in the car for the night. At about 2 a.m., Sarah wakes up to find Charles huddled in prayer and mumbling something over and over. He is so wrecked that she can't get him to tell her what is going on. He just keeps saying, "I'll tell you what's wrong in the morning." After a pretty shaky night of sleep on her part, at first light, Sarah asks him again, "What is going on?" Charles says he woke up to see a really bright white light shining right into the windshield. And out of nowhere, two men appear on either side of the car wearing shiny suits of some kind. The man on the driver's side taps on the window and asks him if they're okay, except his lips are not moving. Charles didn't hear him speaking out loud. He only heard him in his head. He tells the man, "We're okay." The man says, "Good," and then disappears instantly. Hearing Charles's story, Sarah laughs, opens the car window, hangs her head out and looks up at the sky and thanks the Lemurians for checking in on them. And between that nocturnal encounter and the magnificent rainbow over the mountain they see as they are leaving, Sarah now knows they exist and thanks them for their parting gift. She leaves Shasta that day believing there is something on that mountain and with a feeling of amazement to know there is so much out there that we humans don't even know about. On June 27th, 1940, the Mount Shasta Herald prints an article by William Cook recounting the claims of one Professor Edward Larkin. Professor Larkin of the Mount Low Observatory tells the journalist that one night, While calibrating his telescope, he notices something, a strange light coming from the mountain. Curiosity piqued, he focuses the telescope on the mountain and finds that the source of the bright light is something he never could have imagined. What did he see? An enormous Oriental style temple made of carved marble and onyx, whose striking architecture could rival even the temples of the Yucatan. He goes on to explain that he has seen other temples on the mountainside as well, including Greek temples complete with white marble columns, and that these temples feature displays of light that are far beyond our own electrical capabilities. Larkin also tells the Herald reporter that some evenings, while trying to get more glimpses of these beautiful mountainside cathedrals, his view is sometimes obscured by numerous hovering bright lights, and that he believes the temples and the lights can only be from one thing, the Lemurians. Now, the existence of Lemuria has been hotly contested for a long time. Even the author of the article, William Cook, spends a good chunk of the column's real estate on debunking Professor Larkin's claims. But that hasn't stopped the legion of believers in the underground civilization from claiming the reason you can't see it is because either you're not enlightened enough or you haven't been invited by the Lemurians themselves. Kind of hard to counter that argument. Interesting side note, after a time, Professor Larkin apparently gets sidetracked by some other work, and when he's finally ready to get back to studying the Shasta temples of light, he can't find them anymore and never sees them again. The famous naturalist John Muir once said of the spectacular Mount Shasta when first seeing it in 1871, "I was 50 miles away, afoot, alone, and weary. Yet all of my blood turned to wine, and I have not been weary since." And lots of people feel that way about this place. It's now firmly on my bucket list as places I need to check out. This is actually our second episode about this enigmatic natural monument. If you'd like to check out the first one, click right here. Be careful out there, and I will see you here again on the in-between.
All right, we will link this video in the description. Go check it out, give it a thumbs up, support the original creators. They appreciate it so much, and so do we. So yeah, there's obviously there's a lot of legends and stories surrounding Mount Shasta.
Yeah, Mount Shasta is kind of one of the big ones.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a bunch of videos and heard a bunch about it. In these particular instances, it's a lot of it is and we've talked before about, quote unquote cryptids and whether or not it's possible for creatures that are just not on our radar to exist in very isolated locations. I mean, I do think it's possible that something that, some pre-human or something that predates us still exists in very limited capacity or small populations in areas that are not well explored or documented.
Yeah, but in the case of Mount Shasta, we've got a lot more going on there than just Bigfoot or other cryptid-like creatures. There's a whole host of stories and things, UFO sightings, ghosts, this whole talk of ancient Lemuria.
Yeah, and we've talked, I think, before in previous episodes about places where, for lack of a better way of saying it, where the veil is just very thin. I don't know if it's electromagnetic or if it's geologic. Sometimes places that have a strong geologic feature, like a mountain, will have different things going on there. So it's not uncommon for mountains or places, geologic places like that, to have phenomena happening. And I'm not aware of any of this stuff going on with Mount Shasta location wise, like how it was formed, how the mountain came about, and all of this stuff around there. And this is a very a brief video with a couple of things in it that's not going terribly deep into the background of it.
It'd be a much longer video.
I don't, like I said, the kid on the switchback with his father, I don't think it's impossible at all for a spirit to come through and have an effect like that on somebody in that way, just based on my own experience. Oftentimes they want to communicate with you and tell you what happened to them, and it's possible that he got a little too wrapped up in it and started mimicking physically, just like sometimes when your legs jerk in your sleep, or people who sleepwalk, when what your mind is experiencing, the body acts out in certain states depending on what's going on.
Yeah.
So
So, what's your take on the encounter with the two weird guys in shiny suits knocking on the window at night?
I think that's really interesting. I think it's interesting that it freaked that guy out so bad that he was like
Praying and
rocking back and forth and praying. And then the woman was just like, okay, so they showed up to see if we're all right. Like, seems perfectly polite to me. Supernatural park rangers, turned up to see if we were all right out here in the rain on the mountain.
yeah, but like, do you think that would be spirits of some sort? Like, what do you think that was?
I think again we try to draw too many distinctions between spirits and ghosts and angels and guides and aliens, and we try to put words to certain phenomena that based on our arbitrary distinctions between them of what's happening. So could they have been spirits of the mountain? Potentially. Like, just because that gentleman's interpretation of what he saw was more like a bright light shining in the window and two men wearing suits doesn't necessarily mean that's what they actually were, if that makes sense. That could have just been his mind's way of translating the vibration he was interacting with into something that was understandable for him. So if the vibe that's coming off of a being is like, we're here to check on you, you know what I mean? Like, that's the intent, that's what's happening right now. It's not impossible to interpret that as two men behaving like park rangers but dressed in something shiny I don't quite understand. Like,
Right.
that's a possible a visual interpretation of what he was encountering. So sometimes I think we take these things very literally, like it's some sort of
Well,
alien park
we
rangers.
live in
But
a very literal existence.
right, yeah, physical reality is a very literal. We take what we see at face value, but I think it's entirely possible that if there are spirits protecting the mountain, that so a modern person interpreting an encounter like that might interpret it into seeing something along those lines, as opposed to seeing just hovering spirits around your car. If that's not a thing his mind is open to, then the mind will make a different translation so that the experience is understandable.
Right. And then what about the observatory guys seeing the temples and such?
That's a really interesting, a really interesting one. And when I do this, I tend to, take people's experiences at face value. Like, I don't think it's as common as people think it is for people to just make up stories and, you know what I mean,
Yeah,
tell
yeah.
random stories. I really think people don't like to sound crazy by and large.
Yeah.
And so if they're saying a story like that, generally speaking, it's because they're trying to share an experience or put something out there so other people can be, aware of it. I don't think as many people are interested in being famous for being crazy as people seem to think that they are. So,
Infamy is not as good as people think.
yeah, I don't think I'm not saying it doesn't happen. People do perpetrate hoaxes and stuff and pranks. It does happen, but I don't think it's as common as people tend to think it is. Yeah. Um, and it's interesting. Again, this is my interpretation of that is, again, it's a visual interpretation. He's seeing different kinds of temples and structures and things. And in his mind, what he's seeing is things that look ancient to his perspective. So ancient, something that looks ancient and human, like ancient Greek temples or ancient structures that look East Asian.
And also kind of like beautiful and linked to the concepts of like spiritual enlightenment and such. Like he's seen like houses of spirituality, as it were.
Right, correct. So he's seeing great temples of enlightenment. You know what I mean? But in a way that his mind translates it. So something that looks ancient Greek or something that looks ancient East Asian, um, as a way for his mind to put a picture to what he's witnessing, basically. So it could be that what he's witnessing is the energy or the vibration, the structure of some sort of place of congregation for some other dimension. Like, if there's a dimensional rift there, or the veil is thin, if you want to say it that way. And so in an adjacent reality, an adjacent dimension, there, Mount Shasta is a place of,
It's a site of like
yeah,
of spiritual coming together, experiencing the oneness of the universe, as it were, or something along
Yeah,
those lines.
or there is a big civilization of other beings there that's a place of gathering for them.
Like one dimension over.
Right, correct. If there's an adjacent sort of reality happening there. And so the vibration or the understanding of that, the witnessing of that feeling where the veil is thin, it's looking like, shadows of that, shadows of temples. It's like if there were a thin sheet hanging between the realities, what shadows would come through and how would we interpret those shadows through our own lens of understanding.
Yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me that a human might translate that vibration into ancient structures of luminescence and things like that in order to sort of, again, understand the sort of shadows of the other side that are creeping through, where the sheet between realities is thin enough to see it.
All right, makes sense.
So I don't know personally about people who, again, I think humans tend to be very literal in their translations. So I don't know about like a literal city under the mountain or a literal like high-tech civilization under the mountain. I think that's, again, being a little too literal, a little too 3D reality interpretation of what's going on.
Yeah.
It is possible, like I said, there's an energy vortex there, or an electromagnetic field convergence that's happening there that makes the veil thin. So you might another way people sometimes call it is like a portal or an opening to other dimensions. But I think it's just somewhere where the energy is the membrane that blocks us out from witnessing other frequencies is thinner there, where we're able to connect a little bit better.
Well, if we ever get the camping skills up to do it, it would certainly be interesting to take you there sometime and see what you feel from the place.
Oh yeah, I would love to go out there and just, I mean, I'm big into beautiful natural spaces anyway, and I do like hiking and going out places. It's just usually we stay at a lodge and go out and hike the trails and then go back and have a real dinner, not hot. I'm not big into hot dogs and beef jerky as a meal for the day.
Yeah.
I want to go out and do my hiking and then return to a nice hot cup of cocoa and an actual meal in
Yeah,
front
no,
of me.
I hear you there.
I'm a little too soft and fluffy for that.
It's okay to enjoy the outdoors, but maybe a bit more of a curated, controlled fashion.
Right. No, but I'd be totally down to take a trip down to Mount Shasta and go check it out and do some hiking out there. We've been talking about doing some on location stuff anyway, but yeah, Shasta is certainly an interesting location, and I think there can be little doubt just based on the sheer volume of people who experience things there that it's
something is going on.
Yeah,
there's way too much of it. Yeah,
there's an energy vortex or a thinning of the veil in this particular area, and it's not. I really want to stress, because she brought up that some people just aren't enlightened enough or something. Like, I really don't like talk like that, and it makes me sad to hear spiritual people say stuff like that to people who are skeptical. It's really not. All people have the same energetic connections and things, and it's really just a question of your mental frequency being on the right setting in order to pick up on them. So it's not a question of like some sort of lower enlightenment, or you're not cool enough to be invited by the Lumerians like that. I really don't like the sort of spiritual snobbery that happens.
Elitism.
Yeah, that is really unfortunate, I think. Anyone, and as you can see from the stories, even people who are not big believers and thought all of this was nonsense, but if you go out there and you get in tune with nature and you're just in a very peaceful frequency yourself, or a slightly hypnotic state, zoning out and being peaceful in the woods, it's 100% possible for anybody to experience stuff like that. Your degree of enlightenment is not really a factor. It's more a degree of your state of consciousness at the time. So I don't know. I just want to throw that out there and kind of debunk that, because the sort of spiritual snobbery is not up my alley at all. I think anybody's perfectly capable of witnessing and experiencing things.
All right.
Sounds fair. That's what I've got on it. Let us know what you think. If you think we're crazy, if we're thinking we're onto something, like, subscribe, all of that fun stuff. And we will see you guys next time on Unraveling the Unexplained.
Have a good one, folks.